Hey you, and welcome. In this video, we will learn about some of the most popular CSS properties that you can work with. So let's dive right into it. In order to show all the CSS properties that we're going to work with, I will take away what we have written in the blog CSS so far and save. So taking away all the styles that we have written, and we're going to start fresh. First property that I want to show is called color. I'll target my heading ID. In the body, I will provide a color and mark it red, like so. And this will change my font color. So there is a background color, background of the element, versus the foreground color, which is your font color in this case, and I'm marking it red. There's a few ways to deal with colors. Of course, you won't remember all the names. IDE may help you out and you may be able to scroll down to see which color you want, but that's no way to select colors. It can get very cumbersome. So if you know your color values, there are a few color values that CSS can work with. I'll go over to my Firefox and I have this open from W3 Schools where it will show you how many different kind of color values you can provide. So one of them was the natural name, which is red, blue, green, where other ways would be RGB. So if you know the red, green, blue values, then provide that like so, RGB parentheses 255. So I'll just copy this over into my VS Code, see that in action. There we are, the value changes. And if I go back to my Firefox, another way to do it is using the hex value. And that is most common, and most of the color pickers now on the web or even anywhere else, they would allow you to get a hex value for the color. And that's the most common way to do it. So I'll just copy that over. Our color shouldn't really change. Let me just take this away, make it black. All right, let's put the hex value back in. And there we go. We can see the hex value is working. It starts with the hashtag, just like the ID. But since it's after the colon of the property, we have it as a value. And that's why it knows this is a hex color value. And I have my VS Code actually giving me the color value out as well in a small red. So I can actually change it if I want and select a new color value like so. So VS Code will help me out there as well. Let's go back to Firefox. Another way to render out color would be RGBA. Similar to RGB, where you provide the red, green, and blue values, you also provide the alpha value, where 0.5 would mean 50% opacity. That means other 50% you can see through it. And 1 would mean full color versus 0.5 would mean 50% opacity. So if I make this 1, this gives me back the normal color that I would have when I use just RGB. But if I want this to be see-through or a little bit dimmer, I can make it so that it's 9 times lighter. All right. So those are color values and the color property. Next, our old friend background color that we have looked at before is background dash color, and same thing as color. It uses the same color values: hex, RGB, RGBA, HSL, normal, natural, and word for the color. So they are all allowed, and that's how you use a background color property. Next, let's take a look at height and width of an element. Those are other properties in CSS. To show that, I will change my background color to red, and let's provide a width property. And the value of that by default is always set to auto. That means automatically decide what the width will be. In this case, it takes the whole span of the screen or the browser. But let's say I want to change it, and the unit of measurements in CSS, there are plenty of them. By default, we use pixels. So a 50 pixel width looks something like that, whereas just a small block, 150 would be 3 times bigger. So that's one way to do it. Or you can work with percentages if you want to say that based on the width of the browser, select what the width would for my element would be. Let's say it will be 50% of the browser width. So that's how you would do that. I'll make it even bigger, let's say 75%, to show the real difference. And there we are, it's working. So we have the unit of measurement either in pixel or percentages to make it more relative. There are many more unit of measurements. I have my Firefox open, and in the free code camp, there's an article about it where we can see pixel is by default used, but there's also centimeter, millimeter, inches, points, picas, m, rem. There is percentage here, view height, view width. There's plenty of them. Not necessary to know all of them. When you run into a special use case, just search it up on Google and they will allow you to see how to use style particularly. But know that width and height is also a property that you can work with. I'll show height here really quickly, 50 pixel. And there we are, height is being changed as well. There are other properties with width and height. There's the minimum width, minimum height, maximum height. So let me show you how that works. Our width is set to 75%. Let's change it to 25% so it's very small. And let's provide a minimum width. In the minimum width, I would say, yes, 25% is fine. However, my element should never be smaller than 150 pixel or so. If I save that, it will require my element to be at least 150 pixel. However, if I was to make it bigger right now, you would see that at a certain point, my red background gets a little bigger than it needs to be, and that's because of the 25%. So minimum width kicks in when 25% is getting a little too small, and that's how it will stop the element from getting too small. And the maximum width would do the same thing. I'll say it can never exceed the maximum width of 200 pixels. So when I make it a little bigger, the red gets bigger, but at a certain point it will stop even though my browser is extending, and that would happen because of the maximum width. So this is called a responsive design. And same thing happens to height. When the browser is tall or smaller, you can say minimum my element should be this height, maximum my element should be that height. All right, I'll take these away, keep my background color. Let's take a look at the next property. Margin and padding in CSS are very important. You're going to be working with them a lot. They allow you to change the space between the elements and make it a little bit more nicer and cleaner compared to what it looks like at the moment. So let me show you what I mean. I will change my div. It has a class right now. I'll take that away and provide an ID, and let's call this a container type, right? So I will provide a style for container ID. There we are. And let's put the background color to pink, like so, and the entire div is pink, which is great. And then the heading is red. So let's start with margin first. I'll provide margin and same unit of measurement as for width and height. I can start working with pixels, and I'll say margin of 10 pixels should be provided on all four sides of the element. And notice what happens when I save it. The my blog red color has shrunk, and on the left hand side, right hand side, and underneath it, I provided 10 pixel. At the top, it doesn't really provide it. Not sure why. Could be browser thing. There are some default CSS that comes in, so that's probably what's happening here. But that's what a margin would do. If you just want to target left side or right side, we can provide margin dash left, 10 pixel. Let's take away other one, and then you can see now that the right margin is gone, and underneath the size is a little bit bigger. Let's target margin bottom for this element, 10 pixel as well. And there we are. We don't really have to provide the same sizes. We can say one of them is 5 pixel, the other one is 10 pixel. So we can target different sides, which are 4 different sides of each element. All right, so that's margin. What about padding? So let's provide padding of 10 pixel and see how our element changes. So I'll go ahead and save. And notice that padding, instead of providing the space outside of the element, it provides the space inside of the element. So that's why our my blog has gotten a little bigger, because it padded 10 pixel up top, left, bottom, and right. And I can do the same thing here. I can say only padding left should be 10 pixels, or padding right should be 10 pixels. Rest of it should not be impacted. Save that, and you can see that my blog at the top and the bottom are very close to the border, but on the left and the right, the space is sufficient as 10 pixels more. Of course, my blog never reaches too far to the right to actually show the 10 pixels, but it is there. All right, so that's how the spacing in CSS would work using margin and padding. Next, let's talk about border. I would take away the margin and padding. Save that. I provided border 1 pixel solid black. You may have seen me write this before, and this is a shorthand of what border styles are. What I'm doing here is providing a border width, then a border style, and a border color. I could break it down. I could say border width 1 pixel, border style solid, and border color black, and take away the one I wrote before, and exactly the same result happens. So that's just a shorthand that I've been writing, but you can just of course break it down. So you can play around with the values here to say, what if I made it 2 pixel? What if I made it 10 pixel? Crazy amount, but you can really do that. How many different styles are there? In the Firefox, I have this page open from W3 Schools that shows you all the styles, and there's many there. Let's try dotted, for example. I'll take away the solid and say dotted, and this is how it looks. You can of course use VS Code to help you out here, so I'll just take away dotted and do command space all the way at the bottom. I can see that there are options for me to work with dashed or dotted or double. I'll say dashed, and you can see how it works. So that's styles for the border. Usually you would work with solid. I haven't really worked with any other styles otherwise. And then the color, same thing applies here. We can provide hex, RGB, RGBA, a natural name for the color. So they're all allowed for the border. One more thing for the border that we need though is border radius. Very valuable. Sometimes you don't want the borders to be so edgy. You want them to be curvy. So if you do that, border radius can be 5 pixel, and you can see that it has a little bit of a curve now. Let's make this 1 pixel, and let's make the border radius a little bigger, 15 pixel, and you can see how it's getting rounder. If I really wanted to make it into a pill, I could do 50%, I think. Ooh, that's more of an oval. I guess 25% would make it a pill. Something like a pill, close to a pill. But pixels is usually what I would use for this. Say, with border radius, you can target each corner of the element. So I can say border top left radius, 10 pixel, and take away the border radius, and you can see that top left is being targeted. You can do the same thing for bottom left, bottom right, top right. So all of these are targetable. All right, I'll take away these styles. Let's take a look at the next property. Font styles properties in CSS will allow us to change the font of the particular element that we're targeting, and we can work with font family, font style, or font weight properties. So let's start working with font weight first. So I'll provide font weight for the heading, and you can see that we have values from 100 to 900, or you can provide bold, bolder, lighter, or normal. Normal is by default. So I'll provide bolder, save that. I think heading is already bolder. Let's work with normal. Would that do it? Yeah. And lighter, that works as well. So that's font weight, just making it bolder or lighter. We also have font style, where we can say it's italicized. So there we are, it gets italicized. We can always say that's oblique. I'm not sure what it does, but let's just make it normal, which is by default normal. So that's font style and font weight. Next, let's work with the font family. So font family is where you can provide what style of font are you going to use here to show. And by default, I think it's set to Arial, uppercase A. No, but Arial is one of the fonts you can work with. If you do control space, there are tons of default fonts that come with the browser, and VS Code is helping us pick whichever one we want to work with. I believe there's one called cursive, so I can just have my heading in cursive as well. There is serif. I can have it in serif, or I can just say sans serif, which I think is default. Not sure. But font family will allow you to change the font. Great, that's font family. I'll remove this, and let's take a look at the next property. Let's start working with the position property of CSS. I can start writing position. By default, it inherits whatever position is provided by the parent, and I'll change that to either one of the following. I can do absolute, fixed, relative, static, or sticky. I will work with absolute first, and notice what happens as soon as I save. My blog section gets removed from the div and put on its own. So that's what an absolute positioning would mean, is that it's on its own. It's going to pick its own path. And now I can work with other position properties like top, which will tell me how much distance from the top of the browser should it have. So I'll say 10 pixels from the top. Left would have 10, or let's do 100 pixels. Let's move it to the right a little bit. And then bottom, let's pick 10 pixel. I don't know what will happen here. Oh, okay, yeah, so it'll make it bigger. So you can see how absolute value will make it so that this element is on its own, but if you scroll down, it does move up. So it is still somehow related to our div. So that's absolute positioning. Let's remove top, left, bottom. Let's change our position from absolute to fixed, and let's see how that works. So I'm going to save this. Fixed looks pretty much similar to how the absolute worked, where it's on its own and it's in the same position as initially we were when we started working with absolute. But notice what happens when I scroll down. It stays there. So fixed would mean that it's completely stuck there on this page. No matter where you go, no matter you go right, left, anywhere, it will be fixed in that position. So you can say, oh, this is great. I want this to be at the bottom or something. So I'll say 10 pixels from the bottom, and on the right hand side, I'll provide 10 pixels as well. And you can have it at the bottom right hand corner as like an information message or something. A lot of widgets on the browser do these kind of styles, so I'll take that away. I want to show you one more thing, which is the documentation for all of these properties. There are more properties that I haven't shown you. If you want to take a look at them, you can do so at W3 Schools. That's where I got most of my information anyways, and you don't have to memorize any of this. Don't try to memorize it. Just go with the use case that you're working with, and there is tons of resources. You can just Google, I want to style my div background color a certain way, and it will just give you the answer. Stack Overflow is filled with these kind of question and answers, so you don't have to memorize any of this. Just know that these exist, so when you're thinking of styling your HTML, that you have so much available to you and more. There's so much more too. All right, so W3 Schools will have all of these properties that you can work with, along with more information that I could disclose. All right, I'll see you all in the next video.